during the month of Elul, there have been many books that people study for Teshuvah. And we learned last year, remember, we learned Rav Kook together from this time until Yom Kippur. It's very special. We learned Rav Shlomo Kabach a little bit on Teshuvah as well.
It's his yard site coming up.
Tonight is Rav Kook's yard site. No. So we're remembering him for the good. A leader that his Torah really transformed Judaism. And I don't know what we would do had he not been. In Rav Kook, in his time, was not so accepted, but by us, yes, I understand. There were people who thought about him all kinds of ill things. But today it's obvious more than ever that his Torah brings about a whole new approach, a whole new refreshing approach that the world really needed to hear. And Baruch Hashem, we were given such a tzaddik in our times. Rav Kook writes at the introduction to the book of Teshuvah. He said, how can I write a book about Teshuvah? You know how many great people wrote books about Teshuvah? And how many great people spoke about this already? Rav Kook says, the only reason I'm allowed to speak about Teshuvah is because the generation needs to hear it in a way that is more relevant to them. So Teshuvah is a very intimate process to change things that I do, to try to become better, to get rid of habits, of character traits. This is what worked for Jews 1,000 years ago may be very different than what works for Jews today. And the goal is important enough that changing the means to reach that goal is also something that must be done in a mature fashion that is very relevant to the time. And we studied Rav Kook last year. There's so much to learn from Rav Kook about Teshuvah. I wanted to try something different. I've never taught this publicly. And the reason is because I have an inferiority complex, which I'm fair to speak about. Just like when I teach Rav Kook, I'm not a student of Rav Kook. I didn't learn in his Beit Midrash or in the Beit Midrash of his students or even in the Beit Midrash of his students' students. And therefore when I approach Rav Kook's teachings, I must approach it with a certain level of humility that there are people that maybe met him, or if not him, then met his son. If not his son, then they learned for years and years and years by his son's students. And I can't tell you I have the way to understand Rav Kook. I don't. I'm an outsider who looks into this world and is very inspired by it, and sometimes likes to share teachings from it. Kind of like when I teach Chassidut, and I'm not a Chassid. And so when I teach Chassidut, for sure I do with it the things that I would do with any other teaching. But I'm not a Chassidic master, nor was I raised in such circles, and I approach it not as a student, but from an outsider. And I believe very much that actually sometimes serves me to an advantage. And that is that I can see it in a different light. Sometimes when you're the Chassid of somebody, you're so caught up in these preconceived notions that you must accept about the person that you were raised with, that I don't have those preconceived notions. You know, hopefully this video will never get to him, but the Stolen Rebbe should live and be well. He's a very special person. It's my wife's Rebbe, the Rebbe of the Karlin Stolen Chassidut. Aside from being a great person on a spiritual level and on a learning level and a holiness level, one of the most practical Rebbes that I ever spoke with. A person who gets it, who knows it. He speaks a number of languages, plays a number of instruments, educated in a number of different fields outside of the world of Torah. Very interested in arts and the sciences and engineering in the world, and a very well-rounded person. He's the kind of Rebbe you can send an email to, and he'll check it. He won't write back to you. You have to call him to speak about it, but he has an email that he gets emails on, and from his Chassidim, and that's pretty revolutionary in the world of Chassidim to be able to email. Like we used to email, I still do. I email a lot the Kalev Rebbe, but they print it out and then they bring it to him on a piece of paper. This is different. This is like a different approach. And when I first came to meet the Stolen Rebbe, I come in as not a Stolen or Chassid. I walk into that office like me, like just who I am, a simple person who comes in from. I step to his office and I speak to him the way I would speak to any Talmid Chacham that is greater than me, but not necessarily the way Chassidim would speak to their Rebbe. And that allowed me to develop a certain relationship in those times that I am there, where I think the Rebbe finds it amusing sometimes. He kind of thinks it's a little silly on my end, but I'm able to talk about things or bring up things or ask questions that I don't think his Chassidim would ask because they're too intimidated. But I see this is a great man, and I think he has what to share with me, and I'm able to ask. And it's a different place, and sometimes Vori will be like, how could you tell it to the Rebbe? Like, what do you mean? It's a big tzaddik. I want advice. I'm allowed, but they would never do it. And so sometimes that utter reverence can be a handicap. And I think there's just a different approach. I didn't study by Rav Soloveitchik. I didn't even study by Rav Soloveitchik's students. I on my own discovered Rav Soloveitchik. When I was in yeshiva, you were not allowed to study Rav Soloveitchik. A long list of great things, of course. A long list of great things that Essentially, whoever you couldn't study, probably were people you should have been studying. That was the bottom line. I mean, there's some people that maybe wouldn't, but then I was noticing one of the rabbis, I don't want to mention names, I see that he was using an art scroll machzor on Yom Kippur. It was called the machzor of the Rav, or something. Rav Soloveitchik's commentary on the machzor. That doesn't make any sense. You know what they say about Rav Soloveitchik there? They don't even call him rabbi. And I did a little bit of digging. And before this rabbi studied in Baltimore, he was a student of Rav Soloveitchik.
Oh, this truth comes out.
And then I graduated out of high school. And I saw the vice Rosh Hashiva, the Mashgiach of the whole Ner Israel, like the whole thing, not just the high school. I started praying with the Rav's Machzor also. And I said, what is going on here? And I asked some questions. And much to my amusement, this rabbi is a graduate of Yeshiva University. And he studied by Rav Soloveitchik. And they just don't talk about it because it's not politically correct. And that led me to this, it's like almost like this crisis of faith, like they just pulled the rug from underneath their feet. You always heard, and then the two rabbis in the yeshiva are studying his books. Something doesn't make sense here. And then I came into my dorm room in my last year in yeshiva. And I had one roommate who, he was like too religious to talk to me. We kind of got put together in the same room by accident. He would learn like really late at night, come back 2 o'clock in the morning. So I came back from the Beit Midrash and I find him under his blanket reading Rav Soloveitchik's essays on the Talmud in Hebrew, under his blanket. Like, what are you doing under there?
It's a flashlight.
With a flashlight. And he shows me what he's reading. Like, what is going on here?
Don't tell anybody.
He said, you know what they told us about Rav Soloveitchik? That he was the most brilliant mind when it came to studying Talmud. You're just not allowed to study his works because he was a bad person. God of Chashon, I would never study Rav Soloveitchik. He said, so I can't bring his book to the Beit Midrash, but I'm learning it in secret, and it's fascinating. It blew his mind of Rav Soloveitchik what he has to say. And this led me to believe, if it walks like a duck, and it talks like a duck, and it sounds like a duck, and it smells like a duck, it probably is a duck. And Rav Soloveitchik is great enough for this guy to pray for him, great enough to have a conversation, great enough that he's the greatest mind to explain the Talmud. Probably everybody else is wrong about him. And I did my own research, and it's true. Politics are older than me. But Rav Soloveitchik is this refreshing spirit that I haven't had a disciplined study of his works. I can't tell you that I know everything Rav Soloveitchik says about everything. But the few things that I've had the opportunity to learn in the writings of Rav Soloveitchik have really changed my stance on things. Then I recommend a work that I don't agree with all of it, but it's in English, this work. It's also in Hebrew. It's called The Halachic Man. There's another book called The Lonely Man of Faith, but it's very depressing. So if you want to read it, you have the heart for it.
It was written kind of like almost an antithesis to the time.
That's what people want to say. But I once studied the halachic man with a Kabbalist.
Really?
Who told me that only fools think that it contradicts what it says in Kabbalah. But if you were actually to know both well enough, they would complement each other very well. And I believe it. Because once I saw it through that lens, and I'm sure, see, this is the kind of thing. The Rav Soloveitchik rationalist guys will tell me, you're crazy, you think our rabbi or dabbles in Kabbalah. But this is already a different story. This is something else. Very much so. Very much his writings were relevant for many people, aside from the way that his classic students may have understood them. In fact, there's a book that I have in my library, written by Rabbi Herschel Schachter.
Can you hear?
Rabbi Herschel Schachter is one of the...
Yeah.
Jacob's joining us.
Oh, hey Jacob, how are you? One of the greatest...
How's it going?
Good, thank God. Jacob, I'm going to just lower your volume a little bit, okay? You can hear me, right?
Put on mute.
Wonderful. No, mute is he won't hear us. He can put himself on mute.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
He's in Stanford.
One of the...
Berkeley. Well, I do remember the principle that he pointed out. I read that book in my 30s. That the purpose of halachic man is to transform earth, and the purpose of Tanya-like teachings is to bring a person up to the
Well,
next
he really,
level.
in his halachic man,
least that's what I
contrasts him a
remember.
lot to what he calls the religious man, and doesn't like the religious man so much. But I'm not teaching the halachic man today. All I'm saying is if you read this work, you'll find that many of the things you heard from me, from other parents, have been elaborated and expounded on by Rav Soloveitchik in ways that I found, because Rav Peretz he doesn't like philosophy so much. So sometimes when you want to philosophize what it is that he's teaching, I found some of those answers in Rav Soloveitchik that I extrapolated back to us. But there's a book called Nefesh Harav. It's a few volumes. Rav Hershel Schachter wrote all the things he learned from his rabbi, from Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Hershel Schachter was very close to Rav Soloveitchik, almost like the authority on Rav Soloveitchik, one of them. I did have an opportunity to learn also a little bit with the Rabbi Ziegler. Should live and be well. He's a Rosh Yeshiva in Israel. It was a small smicha program, but he was a direct student of Rav Soloveitchik and wrote many volumes of Rav Soloveitchik's halachic responsa. And I heard some things from him that are incredible about Rav Soloveitchik. But Rav Hershel Schachter writes in one of his footnotes, he says when Rav Soloveitchik would give a class on the Talmud, there would be hundreds of people, 400, 500 people that would come, standing room only. There were no chairs left in the Beit Midrash. You even had great rabbis, Rosh Yeshiva, that openly opposed Rav Soloveitchik, that when he gave these like once a year Talmud classes for 3 or 4 hours straight, without using books, do you understand what kind of person you're talking about? They would come listen, even though they were normally among the opponents. They just couldn't get away from such a mind. Rav Hershel Schachter writes that at a certain point, Rav Soloveitchik wanted to teach Chassidut. Because Rav Soloveitchik, I don't know if you know, grew up at a Chabad school in Europe. He went to a Chabad cheder, which is why he knows so much about Chabad. He knows so much about the Tanya. He grew up that way. And when they would say that when he was learning Chassidut, always when his grandfather, Rav Chaim Brisk, would come in, he'd have to switch the books quickly. So his grandfather was a staunch opponent of the Hasidic movement, wouldn't see he was studying Hasidic works. And he decided to start teaching a book called Likutei Torah. Likutei Torah is the first Lubavitcher Rebbe's Kabbalistic teachings on the Chumash. I used to learn Likutei Torah a lot here with Rabbi Tzadikah. And Likutei Torah, he decided, I'm going to give a class. Imagine Rav Soloveitchik, I'm going to give a class in Kabbalah. How many people would sign up for that class? We came to the class, and aside from Rav Hershel Schachter, nobody showed up. Nobody came.
Wow.
The room was empty. And Rav Soloveitchik, and this is in the book, it's not something you have to believe me for. Rav Soloveitchik told Rav Schachter, he said, you know, I feel that my students, they want my mind, but they don't want my heart. And I believe that to be very true. A lot of times we're willing to take only a certain part from our teacher, we don't want the rest of it. And they wanted his mind, the brilliance, the things you could look so smart with in public, but the heart of Rav Soloveitchik was lost to some people. And over the years, I've really connected to this personality. There's a book on Teshuvah that was not written by him. It's Rav Soloveitchik on Teshuvah. It's all his speeches transcribed into book format. So it's his words, just put on paper, not by him. I have a few copies of this that were donated to us by the Jewish Agency. And I was also going to bring them in to the World Zionist organization. I don't know who donated to us, but Dan once sent them my way. I don't know if you remember.
I can't remember how it happened, yeah.
But okay, Baruch Hashem. And I'll bring them tomorrow. But God willing, tomorrow I want to start with you, Rav Soloveitchik on Teshuvah. And the exact topic that we're going to be discussing during the month of Elul is titled, it's an essay of his called Bi'ur Hara or Halato. Are we supposed to destroy the evil that's inside of us? Or are we supposed to uplift the evil that's inside of us? This is Rav Soloveitchik. It's a classic Rav Soloveitchik piece on what some people think Teshuvah is. He'll shatter to pieces and tell you that's not really what you think Teshuvah is. And just on a last note, the world has some misconceptions about Rav Soloveitchik. And that is he was controversial. And there were a lot of, whenever he hears the word controversial, I realize, oh, it's a great person. That's normally the definition. Rav Soloveitchik was different. I have one of my wife's family, a man who was around in the days of when Rav Soloveitchik came to New York. Rav Soloveitchik had, I believe, 2 PhDs. He was not a simple person. He married a woman who was about 10 years older than him, if I'm not confusing personalities. And she wasn't as religious as him when they met each other. And his father wrote him a letter saying, I don't understand why you think this is a good shidduch. She was also a PhD. And Rav Soloveitchik wrote back to him and said, you know, she's the best person that will let me become who I need to become. And he writes to his father, it says in the Shulchan Aruch that there are 2 things I don't have to listen to my parents about. One is studying Torah, and one is about who I should marry. Those are the 2 areas of the world where you do not have to listen to your parents. And he said, I'm sorry, but this is not your jurisdiction. And his father wrote back a letter saying, you're right. And I bless you with marriage. I can't tell you no. And he married her, and really she was this partner for him in his life. Rav Soloveitchik came to America, which was at the time, and I don't know the years, other people are better at the history than I am, but the story. He came to the United States at a time where some of the Rosh Yeshiva were already starting. Torah Vadas was being started in New York, and you had Chaim Berlin that was being started in New York, and the Satmar Rebbe was having a yeshiva already in New York, and Lubavitch was already in New York, and in Baltimore you had Ner Israel, and in Lakewood you had Beit Medrash Gavoa, the Aaron Cutler, and Rav Moshe Feinstein was already, like, a lot of big guns were already here in the United States. And Rav Soloveitchik comes in as a grandson of the greatest Lithuanian mind that ever lived, Rav Chaim of Brisk, or one of the greatest Lithuanian minds that ever lived. But the last generation lived off of Rav Chaim of Brisk, the Brisker Rab. And he came in as literally what should have been the continuation of the Brisker dynasty. And he comes into New York, and all they know about him is that he's a Brisker. He's from the elite Talmudic family of Europe. And he gets job offers from all the major yeshivot in New York. And he declines every single one of them. Except for a job offer from a place that wasn't big enough yet to be called a university. It was called Yeshiva College, because that's the amount of people that they had there. It was the precursor to Yeshiva University, the Rav Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, which was already what they called then modern Orthodox. It wasn't where Briskers go when they come to America. Let's just leave it at that. And he took the job offer. And the rabbis in America, what are you crazy? It's like, you got offered to Harvard and you decided, in their eyes, to join community college. Like, what is wrong with you? And he said, all of your schools, you're going to try to keep me in a box. He said, this is the only yeshiva I could teach at where they're going to let me teach the way I need to teach. And he stayed there for the rest of his life. He became literally the spiritual father of that institution. Aside from what he did in Boston and the school that he opened up there and the shul that he had in Boston, I'm not dealing with his life. But Rav Soloveitchik did some pretty crazy things. And these Rosh Yeshiva didn't know what to do with him. There was a time in Rav Soloveitchik's life he decided he wanted to discover the art of opera music. And he would go at night to the opera house and listen to... And you imagine like the ultra-Orthodox Lithuanian Rosh Yeshiva that his counterpart is going to the opera house at night. Rav Soloveitchik is tough. I know who I am. I know what my boundaries are. These are my limits. Rav Soloveitchik had times in his life where he had a goatee and he was a very out-of-the-box personality. In Chabad, for example, they really don't like Rav Soloveitchik because of this misconception that he was against Chassidut, or that you can Google it, Lubavitch Rebbe and Rav Soloveitchik. And it's one of the few personalities that when Rav Soloveitchik showed up at 770, the Lubavitch Rebbe stood up for him from the time he walked into the room until he personally made sure that he had a seat. And when the Rav Soloveitchik walked out in the middle of the Farbrengen later that evening, the Lubavitch Rebbe also got everyone and him, they stood up and waited for him to leave the room. And they knew each other back in the university in Berlin. The Lubavitch Rebbe was the only one who had the key to the mikveh. I guess nobody in the university actually went to the mikveh. And Rav Soloveitchik and him would learn late at night, all kinds of things. I don't know what those minds were talking about in the 30s in Berlin, but incredible things. The misconceptions that people have about such personalities are sometimes worse than the truth. The truth is that they differed with each other. A lot of people differ with each other. But the truth is there. The connection that they had is there. You can't take those things away from them. Rav Soloveitchik is one of the greatest leaders of the Orthodox movement in the last 100 years. You can't take it away from him. And B'ezrat Hashem, I'm looking forward, together with you, not as a student of Rav Soloveitchik, not as someone bound by Rav Soloveitchik's students' principles or guiding messages, to look at the different perspective of Teshuvah that may enhance our Elul, may enhance our Rosh Hashanah, may enhance our Yom Kippurim. God willing, we'll start tomorrow night. And so this should be the introduction to Rav Soloveitchik on Teshuvah. B'ezrat Hashem.